Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
So, dear students, welcome to another lecture. In this class, we are going to begin with the fiction for Class 12 Alternative English Nagaland Board, which is The Great Expectations, written by Charles Dickens. Now, this story revolves around Pip. Philip Pirrip is his full name. This basically is a family drama that we shall read, where we learn about this character Pip and the expectations that he has in his lives, all the characters that he was connected with, what was the connection altogether, what did he wish to do, what were his desires and aspirations in lives, and what happened at the end. So basically, as I told you, the word that will describe this novel is a family drama. And as a family drama it has all the shades of it. It has emotions, it has anger, it has love, it has jealousy, it has envy, it has tragedy, and so on and so forth. Now, I am going to take up with you the summary of the entire play, one by one, chapter-wise chapter, so that things are clear to you. The main characters that we are going to talk about are Pip, who is the protagonist as well as the narrator of the story. He is narrating to us the entire incident, the entire thing of his life, which has been turned into a form of a novel. Then we have Estella. Estella was the adopted daughter of Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham was again a widow. Joe Gregory and Mrs. Joe. Mrs. Joe was Pip's sister and her husband was Joe. Joe has been portrayed as a wonderful and a very compassionate man. Then we also have a convict. We have Biddy, who again was an orphan. So, using these characters as the main people, the story unfolds. We begin when the narrator of the story, that is Pip, explains to us, he tells everybody that his full name is Philip Pirrip, as I told you. He tells everybody that as he was young, when he was young, he found the pronunciation of his name, Philip Pirrip, to be very hard and difficult, and therefore he shortened it to just Pip. And that is what everybody knows him, that is how everybody calls him. Philip Pirrip, or Pip in short, is an orphan. Orphan is somebody who does not have parents, so he did not have parents. He did not know his parents or any of the 5 brothers, who never lived out of the infancy. So other than he and his sister, there were 5 other brothers he had, but they could not live beyond the age of infant. So till the age of 2, they were okay, but they could not survive more than 2. Pip lived with his older sister and her husband, Joe Gargery, who was a blacksmith in the town. Blacksmith is a person who has something to do with the iron, who mends the iron. And they lived in England, the southeast England, in a very marsh area, an area which was very wet. Now, one very sad and depressive afternoon of Christmas Eve. So, it was the 24th of December in 1860 when Pip was sitting sadly in the churchyard outside the town where his parents and his siblings were buried. So, he was sitting near their graves, and suddenly he came across a very terrifying, a scary man who was dressed in rags. You know, the kind of clothes that he wore, they were all tattered, they were not at all tidy and neat, and he had leg iron. Now, leg iron means, if you must have seen in the movies and the television serials, if a convict runs away from the prison, his feet, his legs are tied with the help of iron shackles. Okay. So those chains which are used to tie the feet of a convict, that has been called as a leg iron over here. And this convict, he just jumps out from behind Pip and holds Pip. And then when the man came to know that Pip was living with Joe Gargery, who was a blacksmith, he told Pip that he had a friend who would kill Pip if he does not bring back some food. Since he was very hungry, he wanted to eat something, so he threatened Pip to get him some food. Along with some food, he wanted Pip to get the file, the metal file of Joe Gargery. Now, metal file is basically that tool, rubbing which on the iron is going to break it or make it weak. Okay, so he wanted to get that metal file so that he could get free from his leg shackles, and he also wanted to eat food. And he threatened Pip that he had a friend who would kill him and would eat his heart and his liver. Pip, obviously being a young boy, a small kid, he got very, very terrified. He was very scared. And he told the man that he will return, will bring food and the metal file, and therefore the man let him go. Now, after Pip returned home, his uncle, who was Joe, the blacksmith, told Pip that his sister, that is Mrs. Joe, had been looking for Pip all around and is very angry. And not only is she looking around for Pip, but also has a tickler in her hand. Now, tickler was basically a cane that Mrs. Joe used to beat Pip, to hit him. So Joe told Pip about it. Not only did he inform him, warn him, but he also helped Pip to hide behind the door so that he would be protected from his sister. When Mrs. Joe returns, she was angry because she was not able to find Pip. So she just entered the room, she just burst into the room, and she discovered Pip, and was a very violent lady. Mrs. Joe was a very violent lady. She threw Pip towards Joe, who was tucking him, who was trying to hold him. Joe was trying to protect him. But Mrs. Joe moved towards where Pip was, started scolding him very bad, and also told him that if it was not because he is small and his, her brother, she would have surely killed her for this careless attitude that he showed. And also, she also told him that she was very regretful of the fact that she took care of him because he troubled her a lot. So she expressed her disappointment at the fact that she took care of this boy so much and he was not turning up to be a nice person. Then the entire family, that is Mr. and Mrs. Joe and Pip, they sat down for tea, and Pip was afraid that he would not be able to steal the food from the pantry. Pantry is that area of the house where you store your supplies, your food supplies. So he knew that he would not be able to get a lot of food, steal a lot of food from the pantry. So what does he do is, he decided that he's going to save his bread and butter for the convict. So he decided that he will keep himself as hungry but will save bread and butter for the convict. So he slipped the bread inside his pants, and obviously he spent the rest of the day, the rest of the evening with that bread inside his pants. It was very uncomfortable for him. He was not trying to, sit properly, or was not in the least comfortable with that. He simply sat in silence because he was very afraid and scared of his sister. Moreover, he was guilty that he had stolen something from his sister. So he was afraid and he was guilty as well that he had stolen something from his sister. But on the top of it, he was scared of that convict who had threatened to kill him. So when Pip was going to bed, he heard a few gunshots. The same night, that is 24th of December, while going to bed, he heard a few gunshots. Now, Joe informed Pip that these gunshots indicated that another convict has escaped from the prison. Pip, being a young boy, did not know who a convict was, so he asked Joe very innocently, who is a convict? Joe told him the answer, not vocally, but by moving his lips, because even Joe was very scared of his wife, that is Mrs. Joe. But the only word that Pip could understand from what Joe had spoken was the word Pip. Now then Pip asked where those firing was coming from, and Mrs. Joe was very angry with the repeated questions and the curiosity of Pip. So she answered his question by saying that these voices were coming from the prison, and the prison was Hulk. So the prison Hulk is where the firing was coming from. This prison had a lot of criminals, and these prisons were always anchored in the marshes. Okay, the marshy area, the very wet, and the area which is very muddy. So these criminals were anchored in the marshes. Now Pip was very restless the whole night because he was scared, he was guilty, and he just could not sleep well. The next early morning, he woke up. He stole a metal file from Joe's forge, from Joe's shelter where he would keep all his tools for working as a blacksmith, and the food that he had saved, that is the bread and the butter. And then he also took something from the pantry. He took a pork pie. He took some brandy also for the convict. Now, since it was early morning and his sister and, her husband, that is Mr. and Mrs. Joe, were fast asleep, Pip ran out towards those marshes where he had seen the convict. Now, he was very terrified, he was very scared, and he thought that because it was a Christmas season, it was a Christmas morning now, and the entire environment around him was very misty, it was very foggy. So he was very scared, and he thought that he was going to be caught by somebody or the other, and he also felt that somebody was coming from behind him. He also, because he was not able to walk, he was feeling cold and fearful and guilty. So he himself was not able to walk, and he compared his feet also to the convict's feet, the convict's legs, which were chained in shackles. Now, Pip was filled with fear, and he turned into the wrong direction, and instead of reaching the place where the convict was waiting for him, he met another convict, the convict who had escaped the previous night and who threatened Pip. and tried to hit him. But then, since it was so misty, it was so foggy, that convict fell down and Pip ran away from there. Pip thought that this was the same convict about whom the first convict had told him. You know, his friend, do you remember? The first convict had told Pip that he had a friend who would kill him and eat his liver and his heart. So Pip mistook the other convict to be his friend. He reached the battery, the place where the first convict was, and the convict was standing there. He was feeling very cold and he was limping since his feet were tired, his legs were tied with the shackles. He just could not walk properly. He gave the food and the file to the convict, and the convict was so hungry that he tore into the food. He ate it wildly and violently, and then obviously he also felt that according to him, the convict was like a dog who was just eating through the food as hungrily as he could. The convict, after he had eaten that, he thanked Pip for his gesture. Now, Pip was afraid that convict, was not going to leave enough food to satisfy for the other friend whom he had met on the marshes. So, Pip told the convict, he could not say directly now that you should leave some food for your friend also. So he just told convict that you should not eat everything. The convict asked him to go. The Pip thought that this man, that this other man he met looked hungry. And the convict now got very surprised and asked Pip that who are you talking about? Who are you mentioning again and again? And told Pip to describe this other man he had met. Pip described him by saying that he also had a leg iron, and whatever description he had said, he said that the man had a bruise, he had a mark on his face, and the moment the convict heard that, the convict got very angry and he dropped down his food and he started filing his leg iron very angrily. And Pip, while the man was filing his leg iron, Pip went away silently and quietly from that place. Now then Pip returned home from the marshes and he again told a lie about where he was. He told his sister that he was at the church listening to the Christmas carols. Mrs. Joe that morning was very ill-tempered and impatient and frustrated because she was preparing the Christmas dinner, the Christmas food for the party that they had hosted for the Christmas, and therefore she refused to make any breakfast for Joe and Pip. And she complained that obviously she's too occupied and busy and tired. Now they had organized a party in the room which they used only once a year, and that room was covered with silver paper. Now the front door of that room was also never used because the room was not used, so the door was not used either. So that door was unlocked for the guests to arrive, and Pip was given the responsibility of welcoming the guest as it was a custom, it was a ritual in the family. Mrs. Joe continued with her preparations, and Joe and Pip, they very awkwardly, why were they feeling so awkward? Because they had to wear those Sunday clothes, the nice and the good clothes that were very stiff, that were very tight to both of them, and they felt a little strange, a little uncomfortable, but they still went to the church. Now Pip, the moment he went to the church, he again started feeling remorseful over what he had done. for having stolen the food from his sister's pantry, and he also decided that the moment he's going to come across with the father, the clergyman at the church, he's going to confess for his mistake. He's going to apologize for what he had done. But because it was a Christmas day, it was a very special day, so the clergyman was very busy. Then Pip and Joe returned home and they found that the house was ready. It was all set for the party and they started receiving the guests. Now, who were the guests? The church clerk, who was very haughty, was very arrogant, and his name was Mr. Wopsle. Mr. Hubble, who was a wheelwright. Wheelwright is a person who repairs the wheel. So there was Mr. Hubble, his wife, Mrs. Hubble, Joe's uncle, who was very well off, who was very rich, and his name was Pumblechook. Now, at the dinner table, the adults, the other people, who were a part of the Christmas dinner, they were accusing, they were blaming Pip that he was very ungrateful for all that his sister had done for him. And then they talked about everything while they were eating their pork. Once Mr. Popsle, he also spoke something very strange about the pigs. So he gave a lecture on the pigs also. And he told Pip that he should be grateful that he is not a pig. Now, throughout the meal, Pip was only focused on one thing. His entire attention was diverted on the fact that he had stolen food from his sister's pantry, and he was afraid that his theft would be discovered. Mrs. Joe offered Uncle Pumblechook some brandy, but Pip again was terrified because he took the brandy, if you remember, the previous night for the convict, and in order to fill the brandy bottle, he had put some water in it. The moment Uncle Pumblechook took a sip of it, he just spit everything out because rather than putting regular water, Pip had diluted the brandy with tar water, the black, dirty water. Now, Pip knew that it was going to be discovered and that his sister is not going to leave him. Pip was scared, but nobody suspected him to be responsible for what had happened. Still, Mrs. Joe announced that now she was going to serve the pork pie. Pork pie also was taken by Pip for the convict. Now Pip was sure that his theft was going to be discovered, and he was so afraid that he ran towards the door so that he could escape from there. But the moment he was trying to run away, he came across two soldiers, two policemen, who were holding a pair of handcuffs in their hands.